Chapter 3. The Ancient Codices, the Vatican Codex and the Sinaitic Codex. This brings us to the consideration of those ancient manuscripts or codices, as they are usually called. A footnote says, Codex is a name given to any ancient manuscript. There are about 140 known codices of the Bible, that is, manuscripts on parchments in uncial characters, all capital letters run together, dating from the 4th to the 10th century, and about 1,200 manuscripts known as cursives, i.e. written in a running hand, between the 9th and the 16th centuries, containing the Gospels, besides about 500 manuscripts containing the rest of the New Testament, to which the modern editors have attributed so high a degree of credibility, and by which their decisions in the construction of a Greek text for the RV have been so largely influenced, and especially to the consideration of the two most venerable of all the existing witnesses to the sacred text, namely the Codex Vaticanus, so called because its repository is the Papal Palace, the Vatican at Rome, and the Codex Sinaiticus, so called because it was discovered by Tischendorf in a monastery in Mount Sinai in Arabia. These manuscripts are supposed, from the character of their writing and from other internal evidences, to date from the 4th century. The next oldest are supposed to date from the 5th century. Hence, upon the generally accepted theory to which we have referred above, the testimony of the two codices just named is to be accepted as decisive in the case of disputed readings. Therefore, the revisers in 1881 committed themselves to the leading of the two ancient witnesses. Did they lead towards or away from the true text of the inspired writings? This is the deeply important matter into which we purpose now to inquire. In addition to the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus, there are three other very ancient manuscripts. These are 1. Codex Alexandrinus. This manuscript has been kept for a long time in the British Museum in London. It contains all the Gospels except small parts of Matthew and John, and all the rest of the New Testament except 2 Corinthians 4:13 to 12:6, 5th century. 2. Codex Ephraemi, kept in Paris, containing only portions of the Gospels, the Acts, Epistles and Revelation, 5th century. 3. Codex Batesa, kept in Cambridge, England, containing nearly all the Gospels and nothing else of the New Testament except portions of the Acts, 6th century. It has a very bad reputation, as fully exposed by Dean Bergen. No editor appears to attach importance to it. The discovery of the Mount Sinai manuscript. This famous codex, with facsimiles of the handwriting and with an account of its directory, is published in full in Dr. Scrivener's work entitled A Full Collection of the Codex Sinaiticus, 1864. Constantine Tischendorf, a noted German scholar who was indefectible in the quest of old manuscripts, was visiting in the year 1844 a monastery on Mount Sinai, and in the course of the visit he chanced to find one day among the waste some leaves of vellum, which upon inspection were found to contain parts of the Septuagint version of the Old Testament in a script which indicated that the manuscript was of great antiquity. In describing his famous discovery, Tischendorf says, I perceived in the middle of the great hall a large and wide basket full of old parchments, and the librarian informed me that 2 heaps of papers like this, moulded by reason of age, had been already committed to the flames. What was my surprise to find among this heap of documents a considerable number of sheets of a copy of the Old Testament in Greek, which seemed to me to be one of the most ancient I had ever seen. The monk allowed him to take 45 of the sheets, but nothing more transpired until 15 years later, when he again visited the monastery, this time under the direct patronage of the Tsar of Russia. And then he was shown a bulky roll of parchment leaves, which included, among other manuscripts of lesser importance, the Codex, now known as the Sinaitic. Naturally enough, Dr. Tischendorf was highly elated by his discovery. Indeed, his enthusiasm was unbounded. He says, "I knew that I held in my hand the most precious Bible treasure in existence." And he considered this discovery to be greater than that of Koh-i-Noor of the Queen of England. As usual, in such cases, this important find made a great stir, especially among those who devoted themselves to the study of antiquity. We are all aware of the marked tendency of human nature to exaggerate the importance of every find. Examples of this sort greet us from time to time. The discovery of the tomb of an Egyptian king is regarded as a matter of such supreme interest to all the world that even trivial details connected with it are communicated by cable to the ends of the earth and are given prominence in the daily newspapers. Thus, an ancient article recently exhumed from the rubbish of a long-buried city will oftentimes start a wave of excitement throughout the world, whereas an article of identical sort, known to have been in existence for some time, would be treated with complete indifference. We need not wonder, therefore, that the great scholar was carried away by his chance discovery, and that he succeeded in impressing upon others also his own idea of the surprising importance of his find. Dean Bergen, speaking of Tischendorf and his discovery, aptly remarks, "Happy in having discovered, in 1859, an universal codex, second in antiquity only to the oldest before known, the Vatican Codex, and strongly resembling the famous 4th century Codex, he suffered his judgment to be overpowered by the circumstance. He at once remoulded his 7th edition, i.e. the 7th edition of his Greek text of the New Testament, in 3,505 places, to the scandal of the science of comparative criticism, as well as to his own grave discredit for discernment and consistency." Evidently, then, Tischendorf was carried off his feet by the subjective influence of his discovery, for he at once surrendered his judgment to this particular manuscript, easily persuading himself that, because of its apparent antiquity, and without regard to any other considerations, it must needs be right in every instance where it differed from the later manuscripts. Thus, having fully committed himself to that view, he naturally adhered to it thereafter. Unfortunately, however, the weight of his great influence affected the whole school of comparative textual criticism, for Dean Bergen goes on to say, "But in fact, the infatuation which prevails to this hour, 1883, in this department of sacred science can only be spoken of as incredible." And he proceeds to show by proof which fill many pages that the one distinctive tenet of the three most famous critics since 1831, Lackman, Tregelles and Tischendorf, has been a superstitious reverence for what is found in the same little handful of early, but not the earliest, nor yet of necessity the purest documents. In this connection, it should be always borne in mind that those text makers who profess to adopt as their controlling principle the acceptance on disputed points of the testimony of the most ancient manuscripts have not acted consistently with that principle. For the fact is that, in the compilation of their Greek text, they have not really followed the most ancient manuscripts, that have been controlled by 2 manuscripts only. Those 2 are followed even against the counter-evidence of all other available manuscripts, amounting to over 1,000, some of which are particularly of equal age, and against the evidence also of versions of the quotations from the writings of the Fathers, much older than the 2 codices referred to. But to this feature of our subject we expect to return.